The problem with other forms of ranked choice voting. In this video we will discuss other methodologies of ranked choice voting, particularly instant runoff voting. We specifically call our methodology ordered choice voting because it is quite distinct from the ranked choice voting methods used today. One method of dealing with a list of candidates instead of a single choice is called fractional voting. With this method of voting, people can assign candidates a fraction of a vote, thereby splitting the vote between one or more candidates. You simply add up the fractions to get the winner, who is in this case Alice. This is a very poor substitute for either instant runoff voting or ordered choice voting. Anyone voting strategically would not even consider giving anyone less than a 1. This method is literally for people too indecisive to figure out who they want to vote for. People rarely assign in their head fractional preferences, they have a real preference of one candidate over another. This is exactly what ordered choice voting addresses. In my opinion, fractional voting only exists as a means to incorporate code in your voting software that can be used in a plausibly deniable way to rig an election. This can be done by surreptitiously weighting the vote of one candidate at 1.2 and another at 0.8 after a certain threshold of votes that would be much greater than a typical pre-election test on a voting machine. Displayed here is the sort of code you might find in such a voting machine using a tally ballot function that is configured to count fractional ballots. I will have more to say on this in videos I do on vote integrity. Instant runoff voting is a methodology of ranked choice voting where you run a series of elections and drop off the last candidate after each round until you are left with only one candidate. This is the method of voting most used for ranked choice voting protocols. This is similar to how we eliminate candidates in our proportional voting algorithm, except we use ordered choice voting instead of top among remaining vote totals to determine the worst candidate. For example, instant runoff voting first would get rid of Elliot since he got no number 1 votes, but we get rid of Bob first because Elliot beats him in a head-to-head race. To better explain the difference between instant runoff voting and ordered choice voting, let's use an example. This will be an example constructed to show you clearly that our ordered choice voting algorithm based on pairwise comparisons is the superior methodology. We will start with our example of the election between Alice, Bob, Charles, Dirk, and Elliot, that you should be familiar with from the first video. We are going to start by taking the same rankings as before, except multiplying them by 1000. Persons number 1 through 1000 vote the same way as person number 1 in the first example. Persons number 1001 through 2000 vote the same way as person number 2 in the first example, and so forth. Obviously, this is not going to affect an ordered choice vote at all. But what happens if we change voter number 2000 and move Bob from the bottom and move him right in front of Dirk? Moving him right ahead of Dirk on only 1 vote should not matter to the result. However, it has a dramatic effect with instant runoff voting. Let's take a look at how this race is handled with instant runoff voting. In round 1, Alice gets 2000 votes, Bob gets 1001 votes, Charles gets 1000 votes, Dirk gets 999 votes, and Elliot gets 0 votes. In instant runoff voting we drop the last voter from the list and move on. In this case this is Elliot. Since he got no number 1 votes at all in the first round, the second round is basically the same in terms of vote totals. Dirk now has the least votes at 999. So, he gets dropped from the list in only the second round by the instant runoff voting methodology. In round 3 Alice gets 3000 votes, Bob gets 1001 votes, and Charles gets 1000 votes. Charles gets the least number of votes and thus gets eliminated in round 3. Remember, Charles was dead last from an ordered choice perspective, losing to everyone else. In the fourth and final round of instant runoff voting Alice wins handily against Bob with 4000 votes to 1001 votes. Alice is the clear winner when instant runoff voting is used to tabulate the votes. Now let's just go through the math on ordered choice voting. Here we run our 10 head-to-head comparisons again. As we expected from how this list was constructed, Dirk wins head-to-head matchups against every other candidate. He literally beats Alice with a 1000 vote margin of victory, and everyone else by at least that number of votes. Yet under instant runoff voting he is the second candidate eliminated. Clearly this is dead wrong. What throws instant runoff voting off is the fact Dirk is splitting the vote early on with 2 other candidates from his party. He only places third within his own party, so gets shown the door early. But because he is considered the more moderate of these 3 candidates, he receives a lot more support from Alice voters that consistently chose him over everyone else in his own party. The relative support from Alice voters combined with the Party B majority for the district gives him the win. Instant runoff voting completely misses this dynamic by just assuming the person with the least amount of number 1 votes in each round is the least well-liked overall. This is why you have to do the head-to-head comparisons individually to get an accurate count. Similarly, if you look at the proportional voting example, when you raise the voting threshold to 21%, Dirk gets completely cut out of the legislature despite being the overall choice in an executive race. Charles, the person least liked in an ordered choice vote, gets the spot for Party B because he is a lot more extreme and caters to his base. Watch our video on proportional representation for the details of this calculation. Hopefully after watching these videos on ordered choice voting and our video on proportional representation, you will think a little more carefully about how an election methodology can seriously impact elections. You cannot assume just anything, such as that the candidate with the least votes in the first round has no chance to win, or that a winner of an ordered choice vote like Dirk must get elected in a proportional vote. If you carefully analyze everything from the individual voter's perspective, both of these statements are false. We believe our methodologies are modeled to best reflect the intentions of the voters and provide them the best representation possible based on their points of view.